My name is Stacy Toma.
My name is Elizabeth Bowen.
My name is Roman Berto Rivera.
We are representing the Chicago Ridge Library. We are interviewing Odette Lapa on Monday, May 1st, 2017 at the Chicago Ridge Public Library. This interview is being conducted as part of the Project Next Generation grant for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and the Illinois Veteran History Project. Funding for the Project Next Generation grant was awarded by the Illinois State Library, the Department of the Office of Secretary of State, using funds provided by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Service and Technology Act, LSTA.
Can you please provide your full name?
Yes, I can. So, good afternoon. My name is Odette Denise Lapa.
What is your date of birth?
I was born June 8th, 1961 in Chicago, Illinois.
Where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois at, I think it's the hospital, Little Company of Mary Hospital.
Who or were your parents?
My parents were Rosemarie Sedano and Dennis Francis Parcham. They are both deceased, but they were both from Chicago, the McKinley Park, Bridgeport area of Chicago, Illinois.
What are or were their occupations?
Their occupations were, my mother was an executive assistant and my father was a mechanic that worked for a mechanical company.
What school and college did you attend?
Well, the schools I attended in Chicago, I attended Edward Everett School in Chicago. That was my grammar school. High school, I attended Thomas Kelly High School in Chicago, and I graduated from Jones Commercial High School in Chicago.
Did you work before joining the service?
I did, and I worked because I went to Jones Commercial in Chicago, it was a program where for your junior and senior year, you had to work. So I went to work for the government, the General Services Administration, and that's how I was introduced to the military, because GSA is where a lot of government people worked. So during my junior and senior year, I did work for the government, and that's when I decided to join the service.
If so, what job did you attend?
So what I did, I was a secretary for the General Services Administration. That's where you learn how to type and file.
What year did you enter the service?
So I joined the service, it was June 12th, 1979. I graduated from high school in June of 1979, and 4 days later I joined the service, the U.S. Army.
How old were you when you started serving?
So I was actually 18 years old when I started serving in the United States Army.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
No, I actually enlisted, as I previously stated, because I was working for the General Services Administration. I met a lot of prior military people. So what I did, there's a building in the city of Chicago, it was 230 South Clark. When you would go into this building at a lot of military, so there was the United States Air Force, Army, Marine, and Navy. So I interviewed with the Marines, I interviewed with the Navy, and I interviewed with the Army. So that's the one that I chose, was with the U.S. Army.
How many years were you initially signed up to serve?
I initially signed up for 6 years, and I served 3 years active duty and then 3 years inactive. After that, for my 3 years active, then I stayed in it's called the civil service, and worked 3 years for the civil service.
What branch of service did you serve in?
So I served with the U.S. Army, and then I also served when I did civilian time with the U.S. Corps of Engineers.
Why did you choose that specific branch, and did you have a reason for joining?
I did. So when I spoke to the Navy and I spoke to the Marines, I think being a female, that was a little bit too much for me. So when I talked to the Army, I knew that I could have a job that was more like an office job. So what I was looking for at that time in my life when I was 18 years old was skills to have employment, where I could use my typing skills. Also, I wanted to travel. And at that time, also the government was providing a program for college. So there were several different reasons why I decided to go U.S. Army, because I felt that if I could make it through basic training, because of course you had to be very athletic, that then I would work what would be considered like an office army, where wasn't interested in doing combat, but I was interested in going overseas.
What was the highest rank that you held?
So the highest rank I held was a E4, which was a specialist first class.
How did it feel when you started your service experience?
Well, let me tell you, here's how I started. The first thing we did was I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey for basic training. From there, I traveled to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. From Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia. So it was a different experience because for 6 weeks, again, I was a female going through basic training. I had to wear Army boots. Basic training was very hard, where you are marching every day, you're doing gymnastics, you're learning how to fire a weapon, a grenade, you're being tear gassed. So the whole experience was quite something. However, I did have, and I'll show you, I did score a sharpshooter when I was in my basic training. So that's something that I'm very proud of, that I went through it just like all men and women go through the same training. Now, not everybody makes it through that basic training because, again, you're marching, you're learning a lot of different skills, so it was quite exciting to go through all of that.
How did you adapt to military life?
I think I adapted by being a person who wasn't afraid of new experiences, to try new things. Certainly there were times I was a little bit overwhelmed, but I just tried to have a sense of self and be able to deal with what was coming my way.
Where did you attend basic training?
So that was at Fort Gordon, Georgia, it's located right outside of Augusta, Georgia. So it was down south. So it was very different for me because it was also very hot. I did my basic training in June through October, and one of the things that I noticed, because I was born and raised in Chicago, when I went down to Fort Gordon, one of the things they do during basic training is we had to go out at night and fire. Again, we're given an M16 weapon. We had to learn how to fire this weapon, and we also had to learn how to fire it at night. So a big experience for me that I remember to this day, now that I'm 55, being 18 years old and looking up in Fort Gordon, Georgia, how big the stars were. So it was such a transformation to be a city girl, to go out into this area, and it was covered in pine trees, there was red sand, but I will just never forget how big the stars looked at night. So it's a good thing when you're young to go out to different areas, leave the city, maybe travel to places and see what our sky looks like at night. So that was very overwhelming because we would have to fire this M16 weapon, and they had tracer bullets on it. So we would be out there at night and we'd be firing these weapons, watching these tracer bullets go out at night. So it was a little bit of a harrowing experience, and I survived, but I was a little bit overwhelmed at times.
How long did you have to train per day?
So we would get up, I would say it's from like sunrise to sunset, so a good 12 to 13 to 14 hours a day, and then we would train Monday through Saturday, and we'd only have one day off, and which was Sunday. So on that Sunday, that's when we would all have to wash our clothes, iron our uniforms. So it was really during the 6 weeks of basic training, it was very, very time-consuming and a little bit overwhelming.
What were the living conditions like?
So the living conditions were very different because it's barracks. I'm sure everybody would be familiar with the term barracks. So that's where we had bunk beds, and being men and women, we were certainly segregated. Men and women did not sleep together or use the same bathrooms and things like that, although I'm certainly things are changing today. But it was segregated where women, we were in bunk beds, and again, we would train all day, and then there would be lights out where the drill sergeant would shut the lights off and everybody would sleep. So I lived with, maybe at that time, there was approximately 20 women I was in the 228th Signal Corps, the 102nd Battalion.
Could you call and talk to your family during basic training?
No, you could not, and that's the one thing I do remember, that during that time frame, what you could do, and I know this will sound very old-fashioned, is you could write letters. So this is the time before, and if young people are watching this, before cell phones, we would have time on that Sunday to write letters, and then we would be able to go to the PX, which was like a shopping store, and you were able to buy paper and pen and stamps and mail letters home to your loved ones.
What was the food like?
The food, if I can recall correctly, was very bland. It wasn't very good, but because you were out every day and doing this exercise and doing this training, you certainly ate what you were given and you weren't fussy.
Were you able to have a social life?
You were, to a certain degree. After the 6 weeks of training, then we would go to school, and I became a communication specialist. So what I did at that time was I was learning the job that I was going to do once I was sent overseas. So there were times when you were able to go out off of the campus, so to speak, or the fort, I guess is a better way to put it. So you did and you didn't. So we did have time to make friends and meet people, but it was more as if you were attending school, so not that much time.
Where were you stationed after basic training?
So after basic training, you get an assignment, and I was assigned to go to Frankfurt, at that time West Germany, and that was with the 5th Signal Corps, and so I was sent there, and I spent my 3-year time in Frankfurt, West Germany.
Were your living conditions different than basic training?
They were, yes, because in Frankfurt, West Germany, that was an area that the Americans, we were right next to a building called the Abrams Building, and this building was a very nice building, though, for where we were stationed. This was where it was co-ed. Men and women lived in the same building, but women had their own rooms, so everybody had their own rooms, but it was co-ed. It was a very nice building. Again, it was called Kennedy Concern, and we were right across the street from the 5th Corps headquarters, which was a building called the Abrams Building.
Was the food different at your new base?
Yes, because this was the first time I had traveled, and again, I'd like to touch upon going to a foreign country. I had to have a lot of, you go through getting shots, so we had to go through kind of like a physical and then get shots to leave the United States to go to a foreign country. So being that this was a foreign country at that time, West Germany, which it's now Germany, the food was very different than American food. In Germany, what I learned is the German people tended to buy and shop daily because they didn't have big homes like here in America. We're very lucky. We've got large refrigerators and refrigeration, where the Europeans had a certain way of buying their food almost on a daily basis because their quarters were so small and different.
Do you have any basic training stories you would like to share?
Well, I can say one thing I do recall now is I was elected as the squad leader, and one thing going back to Fort Gordon, Georgia, the conditions were very different, and I can remember how big the bugs were, because in Fort Gordon, Georgia, it's almost like a tropical climate, and so the insects were so different. And again, it was one thing you learn when you go to basic training, and I met people from all over the United States, is that I was no longer a girl from Chicago or Bridgeport in Chicago. You become someone from Illinois, and then when you leave the United States, you become an American. So it was different.
When you finished basic training, what position did you hold?
So what my job was, I was called a communication specialist, and what I did is we handled messages that were sent from all of the different areas in the military. So if the Corps of Engineers wanted to talk with someone else, they would come down, give us messages, and send them to the different commanders throughout the European theater that I was located in.
What kind of things did you do having that position?
Well, one of the things I'd like to touch upon is back then that was the beginning of computers in 1979. So it was kind of the beginning, the internet was just starting. And so what we would do, we still worked with data cards. And I would like to mention that the computers were huge. Where today, young children hold an iPhone in their hand, and it's amazing how that has such powerful having that little chip in, where the computer that we used, we would basically type messages out and the computers would take up a whole room. So in the 30, 40 years from the time I was in the service till today, it's really changed with regards to communications. So it was a very important job I have. I'd also like to touch on the base that I did hold a top secret clearance because of the messages that we would see, not that we read them, but there were top secret communications that were going back and forth. So I was very proud to have. What happened for them to give me that is they would go and ask questions about your past. So it was important that you didn't have a criminal record, that you were a good person, you had good family, you came from a good background. So being in that as a communication specialist, though, those things were key.
Did you receive any specialized training for that position?
We did. So we had to make sure that our typing skills were very accurate, because what was written on that piece of paper, we had to make sure that we typed it exactly how we saw it. So that became very critical, to stop what you're doing and take your time, but at the same time you had to make sure that you would complete the job in the time frame that you were given.
Do you feel that you received enough training?
I think we did. I think in basic training, with regards to learning how to fire a weapon and throwing a grenade, that was all important. But then to do my job as a communications specialist, I think I did receive all the training that I needed with in terms of computers. So that was very fascinating to be on the ground level of how communications was so important with the commander. So yes, I think I did. I was very grateful.
What were the rules in the military?
So a lot of the rules were, number one, you had to do what you were told. I remember the term insubordination. That meant that you didn't speak back to someone. You had to be very respectful. So I think the military is good and teaches you that. Also, chain of command. That's very important, that if you had an issue or a problem, you'd go to your commander, and then he would go to his commander, and then that commander. So that kind of taught me how to respect the chain of command, so to speak.
Did you serve in any wars?
No, so I didn't serve in wartime. I was in the service from 1989 to 1985. So during that time, fortunately, the United States, we were not in any conflict. So although I do think I am considered a veteran, there are veterans that have served in wartime. But no, I was not in war at that time.
Did you wear any protective gear?
Yes, so what we were given uniforms, and so I'd like to show on my uniform every day we would have, this is part of my 102nd Signia, so I did wear a uniform every day. I did wear combat boots, and although I didn't carry a weapon because I worked in an office, as I showed before, I did have a medal to show my sharpshooting. So. But yes, I did wear a uniform every day, and I did wear combat boots every single day.
Can you explain what your surroundings were like?
So when I was in Frankfurt, West Germany, it was almost as being in a city, because the building, the Abrams building, was a huge building that the 5th Corps was located. So that was very nice, because being in a city, I was able to travel they had a train system similar to our L. So living in Kennedy Concern, I would walk right across the street to do my job in the Abrams building.
Can you describe the scenery?
So the building itself was, I think, a 5-story building. And then again, as I stated, we were in a city. So it would just be, and right next door there was a big park, but it was just a big office building.
What was the weather like where you were stationed?
So in Frankfurt, Germany, I think it was similar to like Chicago, Illinois, where it had the 4 seasons. It was hot, it was cold. So we did have winters, and then we did have summers where it would rain. So it was pretty similar to the Chicago weather. If you look at a map, you can see we're kind of on the same latitude.
How did you stay in contact with family and friends?
So one of the things we did do, because again, this was in the 70s before cell phones and the iPhone, we would write letters. And I do know there was a story that I could tell. There was communications where sometimes they would allow us to make telephone calls, and the phone calls were routed through Ankara, Turkey. So that was something that was different being in West Germany. But basically I wrote a lot of letters because international phone calling at that time was very expensive. So it's very different today than it was back then, because the internet wasn't quite as what it is today.
Were you able to travel around when you had downtime?
I did. So that's one of the nice things I did, was travel. I went to Italy, I went to France, I went to Switzerland. And because in Germany, it's a small country and Europe itself is small, so I was able to travel and see all these places. And I'd like to mention it was so different because here in the United States, we're less than 300 years old, where when you go to Europe and you visit there, they're thousands of years old. So you go into certain churches and buildings, and it gave me an appreciation for being an American and appreciating how young our country is.
If you were in a tropical country, there were lots of bugs. Did you have bug repellents or nets?
Well, when we were in basic training, which was tropical with Fort Gordon, Georgia, no, we did not. But we did see some huge insects in our bunkers, that's for sure.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
So when I was off duty, when I was overseas in Germany, I would travel. As I stated, I would go to the churches. I would just get on the train and travel as far as I could to different places during my time off.
How did you deal with the different languages and cultures?
So that's a good question. What I do remember is being in Germany, when we first arrived, the U.S. military would provide classes for us. So this way we were trained to know the pleasantries. And so what I can remember is, Guten Tag, which means good day. So the military was very big on whatever countries that you'd go in, that they would give you a class. So we wanted to learn the pleasantries, some of the customs of the countries that we were in. At that time, the Germans still had the Deutschmark, so we were also taught a little bit about the exchange of money, where today it's the euro, which makes things much easier for Europeans. So I'm sure that now that they give classes, they'll say, the euro will translate through all of Europe. So, the U.S. Army does give classes to people as they travel overseas to learn some of the language.
Did any of the local citizens work on base where you were stationed?
Where I worked, yes. So we did work with the Germans, which was different because it was both military and non-military people working together.
Stories you would like to share?
So what I would like to say and share is I'm very happy to be in this program, and I hope that all young people, if they're interested in the military, would certainly, now they can go online and do the research. This is a great program that they're putting all of the veterans on videotape for people to do the research. I think going in the military was a wonderful thing for me to do. It taught me great skills. The jobs that I did after being in the military, I worked for the U.S. Corps of Engineers, and I was very fortunate enough to work with Brigadier General Scott B. Smith. So I worked with him in the summer of June of 1984. So I think the military, I was honorably discharged. The military gave me a very solid foundation to go out into the world and be a person that was productive, a person that was proud to be American. So I hope that anybody that sees this video and they're thinking about joining the military or wanting to do something for their government would look at this video and want to do that. So thank you for asking.
How did you return home?
So after I did my time with the service, I decided to stay and work as a civilian in Frankfurt, West Germany. So then I did a few years working for the U.S. Corps of Engineers, and that's when I worked with General Scott B. Smith.
How did you readjust to civilian life after serving?
So luckily, because I decided to stay and work at the Corps of Engineers, it was very easy. And then I think as time goes on, you're able to take what you've learned from the military and apply it to your civilian life today.
Did you return to the job you left?
Well, what I did is being trained as a specialist in communications, I just expanded on that and became a secretary. And then as I further in my life, I came back to the United States, and then I got married. My husband's name is John. We have no children. But what I did during my career is I went on to work at the Chicago Board of Trade. I did barge logistics here in Chicago, and now I work as an administration clerk in my village here at the village of Chicago Ridge.
Siblings serve in the military?
Yes, so my brother, his name is Scott Parcham. He served in the U.S. Air Force. He was military police, and he was from 1985 to 1989. And he was a military police officer in the U.S. Air Force, and he's stationed at Rarefield Air Force Base in England.
What branch did they serve?
He served in the U.S. Air Force as a military police. So no, I can't because it's been so long, but I would say that all the instructors I had were wonderful men and women. We had drill sergeants, and then we worked for other people. So not their names specifically, but I do think that they were all wonderful.
What did your uniforms look like, and were they comfortable?
So our uniforms are back in 1979 look very different from the uniforms that you'd see today in 2017, because we wore green uniforms, like green camouflage, where today you see on TV the uniforms more are like a sandy color, because the United States things have changed. We're not as, we don't have as a military presence in Europe like we do in the Middle East today.
Were there different uniforms for different events?
Yes, there were. So I would wear fatigues to work, and then if we had what we call dress uniforms, so I do recall that we did have skirts and blazers. We did have a few different types of hats, because there were times that it would be called dress uniforms, when there was like pomp and circumstance where we had to be dressed up in uniforms. So there was two sets. There was your just dress uniform, and then there was your everyday fatigues.
What gear were you provided for different weather conditions?
So we did have rain gear, I recall, and we did have a steel helmet. I'm sure that people want to know that. I think when they interview veterans from like World War II, they would use those steel helmets to eat and wash. But in my position, because I worked in an office, I just wore my fatigues.
Were you given coats or long underwear if it was cold?
We were given coats because, again, in Frankfurt, West Germany, the weather was cold. I don't recall having long underwear, but I do remember having a coat.
How did you get paid?
We got paid. That's a very good question. I believe this was the beginning of, and they still do it today, I believe, where you had automatic deposits into your checking account. So that was the genesis, the beginning of that too, where they wanted to teach young people the value of having a savings account and a checkings account. So we did get paid in US dollars, and being in Germany, that was the one good thing. When we would take our money at that time for $1, I think you'd get 4 German Deutschmarks. So it was nice to get paid in US dollars and then live in a country where you got more for your money. So I do recall that.
Did you get paid each week?
I believe we were paid bi-monthly, which means the 15th and the end of the month, so it was twice a month that we got paid.
Were you able to send the money? Were you able to spend the money off base, or did you send it home?
You know, I did both. I did spend money off base, and I did try to save and send some money home.
Was Was the money you got paid enough to live on?
Yes, because again, in Frankfurt, West Germany, it was enough. So yes. And also, I think because we had the cafeteria, the United States did well for their citizens to be able to sustain their lifestyle while they were there.
Do you have any personal reflections that you would like to add?
So I do. I think that one of the things that, again, you learn about the military for all young people, that it gives you good job skills, and I think it prepares you for going forward in your life.
Did you receive any medals?
So I did. There was one that I'd like to show for my service, and this was for an exercise that I was involved in again, and it's for the meritorious service. And so that one thing I do recall is that we did have great people in the military at that time, and I was certainly very happy and pleased to have served with them. So I'm very happy for my military service. I'm happy to have participated in this program with all of you at the Chicago Ridge Library. So thank you.
Did you marry before or after you served?
I got married after I served.
Did you have any friends when you were serving?
I did have friends.
Do you keep in contact with any veterans who served while you did?
No, but I think that right now that's a good thing with regards to the computers, that people can go on Facebook and they can touch base with people. So, and hopefully with this program, people can log on to this website and kind of find some of the people maybe that they did serve with in the past.
What did you learn from your time in the service?
Well, I certainly learned to be a good person, to be on time, to be punctual. I think one thing that the service does teach you is how to be dependable and reliable.
Do you have any photos or objects still as memories?
Well, I did show them earlier, and I do have some photos that hopefully in time, if I do put them on a website, that people could view them then.
How do you think the military now compares to when you served?
Well, I think the military today, one of the things, I think in our current circumstance right now in 2017, I would hope that our military, the commanders, would certainly give good guidance to our current commander-in-chief, President Trump. I think the difference today from when I was in the service in 1979 to today, we have issues with North Korea. There's certain things going on in this world, and I would certainly hope that our president would listen to his commanders in the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and the U.S. Army to take their advice and make a good decision with also the people in the Pentagon to make good decisions for all of us Americans.
Are you a member of any veterans organization?
No, I'm not. I know that they do have some now, like the Women's Auxiliary. So hopefully now that this has sparked an interest in things, that would be something that I would look into.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
So what I'd like to leave is that I hope, again, if you're interested in the military, that you do your research. Certainly touch base with the Marines, with the Navy, with the Air Force, with the Army. I think that we should all be proud as Americans that you can volunteer for service or you do not have to do service. So we're very fortunate as a country. There are other countries where you have to go to the service. So I think that all young people should kind of realize that it could be your choice versus there are countries in the world where you don't have a choice. I hope that the people, if they're doing the research that they want to do this, that they do it and feel like I did. It was a great part of my life. I'm glad. I'm very proud to be an American, and I'm very proud of my military service. So again, thank you.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
Nope, I think we've touched on everything. So thank you. Again, I want to thank all the children at the Chicago Public Library for participating and all of the adults that helped this program.
We'd like to thank you for serving and thank you for coming today and sharing your story with us. And many people that will see this interview in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.